Our study through the book of Acts will take us another direction. Or at least this incident or this story this morning will kind of be like a hinge that opens the door to a new direction. Chapter 6 is where we are this week, and chapter 6 just seems to be like one of those random events. You know, Luke just throws in this random story. Well, what does that have to do with anything? But this random event in the life of this new church. And this event does have a great lesson to teach us about how to handle conflict. But still, I think as we study this story, we'll see that the main reason for this story's inclusion into Luke's history will become more and more apparent as we go along. So let's say a quick word of prayer as we begin. Father, I pray that you will direct us, that you will direct our study, that you will open our eyes and our hearts to see your word, to see how you directed these things, these so-called seemingly random events, how your hand was in it. As we've talked here often, Father, we love seeing your hand. We've called them God winks. We love to see you work. What the world may call random events or the world may call coincidence, we know that it is your hand that is upon the events. We love seeing you work, Lord, so we may give you praise and honor and glory. So I pray, Father, as we study this, you will open our eyes to see your hand working in history. So we lift our prayers this morning for direction in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, at the end of chapter 5, Luke again gives an overview. He gives the incident, and then he gives an overview, these things that took place after the specific incident. But as you recall last time, the disciples, and now all 12 of them, this time all 12 of them apparently, had been arrested for preaching about Jesus, for specifically teaching about the resurrection. We see that happening more and more, and we saw that they were arrested and because of the jealousy of the high priest. Well, the word was jealousy. There was actually indignation and rage because they were teaching about the resurrection. And remember, Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. But after that incident, the disciples were flogged and sent out. And then we read in verse 41 of chapter 5, so they went on their way from the presence of the council, the Sanhedrin, where they had been flogged, they'd been beaten. They went on their way rejoicing that they had been considered worthy to suffer shame for his name. And in verse 42, and in every day in the temple and from house to house, they kept right on preaching and teaching Jesus as the Christ. In other words, Jesus as the Messiah, as the Anointed One. A lot of times we read over short verses like this and we don't really stop to think about what it's actually saying. I mean, read the words, read the details there. It said that the disciples did not stop teaching and preaching. It didn't even slow them down. But where were they doing this? They were doing it in the temple and from house to house. Now remember, we're only talking about Jews here. There are no Gentiles in the picture. This is Jewish men teaching Jewish people. They are still fully Jews. We got our grandson. I ordered this set of books for our grandson. He's turning 8 today, actually, and I ordered this set of books for him. And they're written kind of in comic book style books, but what they are is they are teaching about Jesus as a Jew. Jesus was a Jewish man. Yes, he is the Messiah. He is Christ, but he was a Jewish man. He lived in a Jewish culture. And we don't oftentimes know that. We think, he has blonde hair and blue eyes and looks just like I don't have blonde hair and blue eyes, but it looks just like the rest of us, But he doesn't look like Americans or Europeans. He was a Jewish man, and we need to know that. Our children need to know that. But These were Jewish men teaching Jewish people. They were going on every day with their own Jewish lives. They were doing this in the temple and from house to house. And they still looked upon this new thing. They were calling them the way, because Jesus said, I am the way. The followers of the way is what they called them many times. They still looked upon this as just a sect of Judaism. They're all still Jews. This is just one little part of Judaism that happens to believe that the Messiah already came, that Jesus was the Messiah. And so, as I said, the fact that Gentiles might someday be part of this group never crossed their minds. I mean, we could go into some of the Old Testament prophecies and show how Gentiles would be a part of it, but how they thought it was going to happen is entirely different from how it did happen, which we'll see in a future lesson. But they were meeting daily in the temple complex. They were meeting in that area of Solomon's porch where they did much of the teaching. And some commentators think that when it says they were meeting from house to house, that this referred to their gathering on the day after the Sabbath day. Remember, when's the Sabbath? That's on Saturday. So they gathered on the day after the Sabbath, on the Lord's Day, on Sunday, from house to house. I've often said about our group that we're actually more like a house church. We just happen to have a building to meet in. It's that relationship, that fellowship. And that's how they were meeting, from house to house in small groups. Well, chapter 6 then carries right on over with this summary and the overview into the next incident. So look at how this flows together. Let me back up to chapter 5, verse 41. So they went on their way from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they'd been considered worthy to suffer shame for his name. And every day in the temple, from house to house, they kept right on teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. Now at this time, while the disciples were increasing in number, see how it flows together? Luke is just giving the overview. This was happening. Now, while this was all happening, this incident took place. Now, just because Luke records this next doesn't mean it happened the next day. It may have been months later. We don't really know, but it is during the time as they are increasing in numbers. We don't know, it didn't take, we don't know how much time elapsed between the account of the flogging and this, but it didn't happen overnight. As they were while they were increasing in number, while this was happening, this incident took place. In fact, many of the older commentaries, or many word study commentaries, say that it really should read this way: but at this time, while they were increasing in number. So, well, what difference does it make? Now, while they were increasing, but while they were increasing? Well, the difference is, as we've talked about before, to say "and at this time" just indicates that it's something that took place along the same time frame. But as we've seen over and over in our scriptures, when something starts out, "but at this time," we know something contrasting is about to happen. We've talked so much about how these believers were of one heart and one soul, and how they worshiped together, and they just plain enjoyed being together. But nothing in this fallen world is ever going to be perfect. But at this time, while they were increasing in number, one other quick thing here on this, we sometimes read over quickly the fact that they were increasing in number. We started out with 120 believers on that day of Pentecost. About 3,000 were added on that day, and at other times there were up to 5,000, and then multitudes, and then they're giving, not even giving numbers anymore. So now we're talking about well in excess of 10 to 12,000 believers. Maybe even more when you count women and children. You know, I like to put things in comparison. I like to, if I say something, you know, we read something in Scripture and they went a mile, I like to think in my mind, okay, I know how far it is from here to here, it makes a mile. I like to picture it. So how many people are 12 to 15,000? I did some research on that sometime, but first time I talked through this, and it was like if you take, let's see, how did I put that? It's about a dozen of our Knox County high schools to reach that many people. Take about a dozen Knox County high schools to reach that many people. So just picture that number of people in your mind. That many of these believers lived in Jerusalem and Judea, but many of them, remember, didn't live there originally. They came for Pentecost and stayed. This new thing happened and they stayed there. So they have to be taken care of. They don't have homes there. A lot has to go into meeting their needs. So just think about 12 pastors, 12 apostles seeing to that many people's needs. So here we are in the beginning of chapter 6. And we have an incident and how that incident was handled. But at this time, while the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint arose on the part of the Hellenistic Jews against the native Hebrews. And here was the complaint, the Hellenistic Jews, because their widows were being overlooked in the daily serving of food. There was an incident, there was a need. We've talked before about how Satan persecutes the church. When persecution comes on the church from the outside, the church grows. But Satan's greatest tactic to disturb or cause disruption within a church comes from the inside of a church. A disruption within the church can literally kill a church. There's probably not a person here who has not seen a church fight of some kind. The disciples, though, handled this disruption swiftly and decisively, which is how these things should be dealt with. First of all, we need to understand the difference between the Hellenistic Jews and the native Jews, or as my translation puts it. Some of your translations may say the Greek-speaking Jews and the Hebrew-speaking Jews. But essentially, everyone was able to speak Greek because that was the language of commerce. There were those who spoke Greek all the time and could barely speak Aramaic, and those who spoke Aramaic at the time but only spoke Greek when they had to. That's the difference here. It's essentially, the distinction had to do more with lifestyle than it did with language. It wasn't just that there were two different languages. It was what those languages represented. Those who spoke Aramaic, the New Testament version of Hebrew there, they embraced that lifestyle, the Hebrew lifestyle. Those who were Hellenistic embraced all the Greek lifestyle. So you had two groups of lifestyles there, more so than language. The Hellenistic Jews were those Jews who we might say in the South sometime they weren't from around here. This, as I said, were those who just came for Pentecost and stayed. They were called Hellenistic because they, as I said, they spoke Greek as their primary language, but they were steeped in Greek culture. That was more their culture than was the Hebrew culture. The so-called Hebrew-speaking Jews were those they may have even been born outside of Jerusalem, but they were adamant about retaining their Hebrew culture, about rejecting Greek culture. They may have lived in a Greek culture, but they didn't embrace the Greek culture. So you see, you have these two mindsets. But the problem, it seems, is that the widows that were from outside of Jerusalem were somehow being overlooked in meeting their needs. We read a couple of weeks ago about Barnabas selling the tract of land and bringing the money, and then Ananias and Sapphira and what they did. But the fact is that these monies were brought, and these things were brought to the disciples, the apostles, the 12, and they oversaw the distribution. Well, as the numbers grew, you can imagine what that became like. It was a huge undertaking. We don't know how this happened. We don't know how these Hellenistic widows were being overlooked. The text doesn't tell us how it happened. Some commentaries went to great length to say they were intentionally overlooked. But you know, the way this reads, the way it looks, is that it wasn't intentional. As I was studying this and thinking about this, I thought, you know, maybe it was just that those who were from there, their needs were better known. You see what I'm saying? Some of you all I know better than I know some of the rest of you. So I'm more apt to know what your needs are than those that I don't know as well. It's not that their needs, I don't think their needs were intentionally overlooked. They just weren't always known. It wasn't always apparent what the need was. But whatever it was, whichever way it was, verse 1, in my translation, says that a complaint arose. The King James Version is better here, and it says there arose a murmuring. The New Living Translation says there was rumblings of discontent. You know what that is? That's text messages going back and forth. Did you hear? No, really? It should never be handled that way. Finally, the word got to the right place, and look at how the disciples handled it. Verses 2 through 6. The 12, the apostles, summoned the congregation, the multitudes together, not just the small groups. I don't know whether they had all 10 or 12,000 of them or how they did it, but it just said the congregation, and the word there is the multitude of the other disciples, the other believers, and they said to them, look, we can't do everything. It's not desirable for us to neglect the Word of God in order to serve tables. Now, that's not saying that serving tables is not important. That's extremely important. But you have to prioritize your time. Not any one of us can do everything. That's why we rely on one another. And so look at what they said. The you there is implied in verse 3. You, Hellenistic Jews, you select from among yourselves, believers, brethren, seven men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task. And this is why I believe the need was just not known. It was not apparent, maybe. Choose someone of your group who knows the needs of the group. I don't know the need of this group. Put someone in charge of this who understands and knows the need of this group. And then they go on to say, but we, the 12, we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the Word. And here we begin seeing, back in, at the end of chapter 4, when Barnabas brought the money, and the chapter 5, when Ananias and Sapphira brought it, Peter was overseeing everything. And I think Peter's finally thought, I can't do it all. I've got to focus in what I've got to focus on. And so that's what they said. We will devote ourselves to prayer and the ministry of the Word. And the statement found approval with the whole congregation. And they chose, and it gives us 7 men. And they all have Greek names. That's why I believe you put in charge, you meet the need of those who know the need. They chose Stephen, a man full of faith and the Holy Spirit, and Philip, and Prochorus, and Nicanor, and Timon, and Parmenas, and Nicholas, who was actually a proselyte. He was a Gentile, but he was a proselyte Jew from Antioch. Tuck that little nugget away in your mind. We'll talk about these proselytes from Antioch another day. And so the apostles, they brought these men, and the apostles laid their hands on them and prayed. And then verse 7, and the word of the Lord kept on spreading. They had a need, and they met it. There was something that needed to be dealt with, and they dealt with it. And then chapter 7, Luke again gives an overview before going on to the next incident. It was taken care of and then put aside. They didn't drag it out. The word of God kept on spreading, and the number of the disciples continued to increase greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were becoming obedient to the faith. We don't have really time to dig into that, but there's a lot we could say about the priests and their coming to believe, and I think we'll tie that in another time, but just tuck that one away too. And then verse 8, we get another incident that takes something that happened to one of these 7 men. At verse 8, and Stephen, full of grace and power, was performing great wonders and signs among the people. Not only was Stephen meeting needs, he was performing miracles as well. He was meeting needs of people. Throughout history, there are always those individuals that just seem to be in the right place at the right time. We think about Churchill or Lincoln in modern day history, or we think about Martin Luther or William Tyndale in church history. And it's just like they just hang on for the ride. It's like their lives are not their own. They're just predestined maybe, to do something beyond what we just call daily life. There was a need and they filled it. In the history of the new church, Stephen was this person. And here again, my opinion is, I think this whole episode of the widow's needs, although we learn a great deal from it, although we learn how that we should take care of things and not let them turn into murmurings and disruptions, rumblings of discontent. But I think one of the great reasons for having that story is to introduce us to Stephen. You couldn't just out of the blue say, well, there was Stephen. Well, where'd he come from? Stephen was chosen to meet this need. And so now we learn about Stephen. It's a hinge. It's a turning point. And as we will see, Stephen's whole purpose in the course of history, sets the stage for Saul. By the way, a little pet peeve here, Saul's name was not changed to Paul on the Damascus Road. We'll talk about that in another lesson too. But the fact that this episode introduces us ultimately to Saul doesn't mean that we can't learn something from Stephen's life. We can't pass over Stephen too quickly to get to Saul. We got to know about Stephen's life. There's a lot that we can gain from studying Stephen. We don't know where he was from originally. We know that he has a Hellenistic name. We know that he was a Greek-speaking Jew living in Jerusalem. And think about this, since he was a Hellenistic or Greek-speaking Jew, it's understandable that he would attend a Hellenistic synagogue. I mean, don't we go to church where we feel comfortable going to church? You may have churches many churches that are sound and solid in their teaching and they're great and you can learn great, but you want to be where you feel comfortable, where you feel like you love people and people love you. You just have this camaraderie. Well, Stephen, being this Hellenistic Jew, went to the synagogue that was the Hellenistic synagogue. Many commentators agree that there were upwards of 400 plus synagogues in Jerusalem. I mean, we think about that like, wow, that's a lot of synagogues. Think of how many churches are within a 5-mile radius of your house. The fact that there were this many synagogues just means that there were many groups that had camaraderie or commonality among them. But Stephen, being, as verse 5 says, full of faith and the Holy Spirit, and then verse 8 says he was full of grace and power. What are you going to do when you have this? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to want to tell somebody. You've learned about this Messiah, and you're full of grace, you're full of wisdom, you're full of the Holy Spirit. You want to share what you've learned. And so he wanted to share this. So where else do you share when you learn something? Who's the first people you want to tell? You want to tell your family. You want to tell your church family. Can't wait to get to church to tell them what I learned about this. May not have anything at all to do with church. It's just something you learned that was exciting. Well, that's the way Stephen was. He wanted to share with his friends at church. So, as he did this, it was the custom in the synagogues, so this is the way they did church. They would have debates, not arguments, but they would debate religious issues. And Stephen witnessed, when it was his turn, witnessed about the good news of Jesus Christ as the Messiah, resurrected, dead, crucified, resurrected, risen Lord, indwelling Spirit. And so, after a time, the debate became more than just a pleasant exchange of ideas. But Stephen's witness was difficult to resist. He was so good, and he knew what he believed so well that they couldn't resist what he was saying. Acts 6 verse 10 tells us that they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. Well, as we talk about this, verse 8, Stephen, full of grace and power, was performing great wonders and signs from the people. But some men of what was called the synagogue of the freedmen, including both Cyrenians and Alexandrians, some from Cilicia and Asia, rose up and argued with Stephen. And yet they were unable to cope with the wisdom and the spirit with which he was speaking. They couldn't counter anything that he was saying. But as we read that, I don't know if you caught it, something happened between verse 8, when he's filled with this grace and power, and verse 10, when they can't resist him. Well, what happens in between there is where they're from. Verse 9. They were Jews from Cyrene and Alexandria and Cilicia and the province of Asia. First of all, they're all Jews. But the fact that it says that they were Jews from these areas tells us that they were not followers of Jesus Christ. They were fully Jew. They were Hebrew Jews. They went to head with Stephen. But we want to take special note of one of the places, Cilicia. Cilicia is a province north of Syria on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and one of the towns in the province of Cilicia is Tarsus. Now, who do we all know and love? It's from Tarsus. Saul. Some commentators believe that Saul played a big part in soliciting these false witnesses against Stephen. That behind the scenes, Saul was actually the one that instigated this whole matter. Saul was in charge. There's so much that we could say about this synagogue and about Saul or Paul's connection to it. We don't have time to cover that. But look at what happened. Verse 11. It says they, that would have been these Jews from these different places, the synagogue of the freedmen. Let me tell you this about it, though. It was, when it says freedmen, it means their ancestors had been Roman slaves and had been freed. And we know Saul's father had been a Roman citizen who had been freed as a slave. But anyway, verse 11, when it says they, you can almost say he, Saul, they secretly induced men to say, "We have heard him," Stephen, "speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God." So they start out with that. They come up with this tale about him. We've heard him speak these blasphemous words against Moses and against God, those two first. They would have what they would call a lower court. He was brought before the leadership of the synagogue first. That was the lower court. Then, verse 12, and they stirred up the people, the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and dragged him away where? To the council. Now they've dragged him before the Sanhedrin. And we see now that two sets of charges are set against him. And then we get to verse 13. Well, in verse 11, we see that he's charged, first of all, blasphemous words against Moses and against God. And then in verse 13, he has two more charges brought against him. Just like they did with Jesus, the charges changed. And they bring two completely different charges. Now they say they brought forth false witnesses who said this man incessantly speaks against this holy place, talking about the temple and the law. Now the charges have changed, just like they did with Jesus. The holy place, as I said, refers to the temple and the law. Then verse 14 says, "For we have heard him say that this Nazarene Jesus will destroy this place, the temple, and alter the customs which Moses handed down to us." So, is that what Jesus really said? Well, sort of. We see here that the best lies are wrapped with a shroud of truth. Jesus did say in John 2 that the temple of his body would be destroyed and restored in 3 days, but he wasn't talking about the physical temple. And what did Jesus say about the law and the customs? In Matthew 5:17, he said, "Think not that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I have not come to destroy, but to fulfill." So he said he's going to alter them. No, he didn't say he was going to alter them. He said he was going to fulfill them. He did, however, Jesus did with the shedding of his blood institute the new covenant that Jeremiah promised would be written in the heart. But then verse 15 says, "And fixing their gaze on him," that's those in the Sanhedrin, "all who were sitting in the council saw his face like the face of an angel." Now, I wish we had more time to dig into this. We hear that phrase, "Oh, she had the face of an angel." We think sweet, innocent, loving. Have you seen some of the angels in the Old Testament with their swords and, the cherubim that blocked the entrance to the Garden of Eden with their flaming sword? The face of an angel didn't always mean sweet and innocent. It could mean glowing, like Moses' face did. But as I read this and knowing what we know about these angels, I'm thinking he had a face that was determined. They could see him set his face in determination. So, 4 things. He's charged with blaspheming Moses and God and the temple and the law. Was Stephen guilty of this? We'll find out next week when you turn in once again to As the Sanhedrin Turns. But what we'll see, actually, is the best defense is a good offense. Chapter 7 is long, and I encourage you to read chapter 7 this week because I don't know, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to break that up into 2 or not, but if it's 1, we're going to go through it like drinking from a fire hose. But you got to know this Old Testament history. But it's a great chapter. But look at verse 1 of chapter 7. The high priest looked at Caiaphas, and remember this is Caiaphas. Caiaphas looked at Stephen and said, "Are these things so?" And then Stephen starts in. So there's two things I think that we can take from these 2 incidences that we look at this week. First of all, murmuring is never a way to handle any problem. I mean, we're all going to do things that we shouldn't do. We're all going to say things we shouldn't say. Sometimes I just open my mouth and stuff falls out. Tell me if I've said something wrong. But more than that, as we look at Stephen's life, I think of 1 Peter 3:15. Peter said, "Always be ready to make a defense." It doesn't mean a battle, an argument, but it means to stand for what you believe. Always be ready to make a defense to anyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is within you. But then he adds this, "Yet do it with gentleness and reverence." Always be ready to stand. Always be ready to share why you believe, but do it with love. Stephen took a stand. As we will see, he's very, as you read this next chapter, you see he's very respectful, but he also gets his point across. So that's going to be an exciting lesson. So let's pray. Father, I pray as we look at these incidences and we just take them as they come in Scripture.